My name is James Taylor, I'm 47 years old and I work as an architect. My wife, Sophie, was a college professor and we had been married for 20 years. It wasn't a perfect marriage, but it was ours and that was good enough for me. We had raised 2 children, bought a house, traveled together, and built a life filled with memories. Sure, we had our disagreements like any couple, but nothing that couldn't be worked through. Life was predictable, comfortable. I loved Sophie deeply and I thought she felt the same about me. We had a strong connection. She was the kind of woman who could light up a room with her laughter, always so full of energy and curiosity. I admired her drive, her passion for teaching, and the way she could balance her career with being a mother and wife. She was the one person who knew me better than anyone else. Or at least, I thought she did. Our family vacation had been a welcome break from the usual grind. We'd gone to the beach for a week, just the 4 of us, Sophie, me, and our 2 kids, Emma and Luke. It was one of those rare trips where everything went perfectly. We spent our days by the ocean, building sandcastles, playing games, and enjoying the warm sun. At night, we'd all gather for dinner and tell stories, laughing about things that happened during the day. It felt like we were reconnecting in a way that was both familiar and new. But when we returned home, something felt different. At first, I couldn't put my finger on it. Sophie seemed a little more distant than usual, but I figured it was just the post-vacation blues. After all, we'd had a busy schedule before we left, and there was always a certain level of stress when returning to work and responsibilities. Still, there were signs, small things that didn't sit right with me. Sophie's phone became a constant companion in her hands. I'd always known she was a little attached to her phone, who isn't these days. But it wasn't just the usual checking of emails or responding to messages. She was on it constantly, whether we were sitting together at the kitchen table or watching TV. And when I asked her about it, she would brush it off with a distracted smile, saying she was just catching up on work or answering emails from students. I didn't think much of it at first. She'd always been a busy person, someone who liked to stay organized and in control. But something about the way she kept her phone close, never letting it leave her side, started to nag at me. I began to notice that she never showed me her screen anymore. If I asked her about something on her phone, she would quickly turn it away or change the subject. Sophie had always been an open book with me. We had never kept secrets from one another. So, why the sudden change? I tried not to overthink it. We had been through phases like this before, where one of us got too caught up in work or family life and needed a little extra space. I told myself I was just being paranoid, and maybe I was. After all, Sophie had always been trustworthy. She had never given me any reason to doubt her. But then, one evening, everything changed. We had some friends over for dinner, a casual gathering, nothing special. Sophie had been a little quieter than usual throughout the evening, but I figured she was just tired. After all, we had just come back from a week away and it always took a few days to get back into the rhythm of things. I tried to keep the conversation going, but it seemed like Sophie wasn't interested in talking to me. She was absorbed in her own thoughts, barely engaging in our conversation. At one point during the evening, I noticed that she wasn't even making eye contact with me. She kept glancing around the room, laughing at things other people said, but she barely acknowledged anything I had to say. It wasn't the usual playfulness that I was used to. It was as though I had become invisible. I thought maybe it was just me, maybe I was reading too much into it. I tried to brush it off, but a sinking feeling began to settle in my chest. When the evening wound down and our guests left, I felt an odd tension in the air, one that wasn't there before. Sophie didn't even seem eager to say goodbye or thank them for coming. She just gave a quick wave and retreated to the kitchen. I sat on the couch, staring at the empty space she had left, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. I could feel the knot in my stomach tighten as I replayed the evening in my head. It wasn't just the distance between us, it was something more. There was a chill, a disconnect that I couldn't ignore. Later that night, Sophie and I were cleaning up the kitchen together. The silence between us was heavy. I tried to start a conversation, but she was distant, too caught up in her thoughts to give me a real answer. I finally asked her if something was wrong, if I had done something to upset her. She paused, glancing up at me before brushing it off with a forced smile. "It's nothing, James," she said, her voice flat. "Just tired, that's all." But I wasn't convinced. I felt like there was more she wasn't telling me. The next moment would change everything. As we stood in the kitchen, I heard voices from outside, the sound of laughter spilling into the air. Our friends were still hanging out by the driveway, chatting in the cool night air. I noticed Sophie's eyes flicker towards the window. It was brief, but I saw it. There was a moment of something in her eyes, something that didn't belong. And then I saw him, One of the colleagues Sophie had invited to dinner, Mark, was standing by the driveway, a little too close to Sophie. They were talking in low voices, and I could see that he was touching her arm. First, I thought it was nothing. After all, they were friends, right? But then, as I stood there, I saw them lean in toward each other. And that's when it happened. Sophie kissed him. It wasn't a friendly kiss or a casual peck on the cheek. It was a full kiss, lips pressed together for a long moment. My heart stopped. I wanted to move, to say something, but I was frozen, unable to process what I had just seen. Sophie pulled away quickly, looking up at me, her eyes wide in shock as if she hadn't expected me to be there. She quickly composed herself, stepping away from Mark and brushing it off. "James, it's not what it looks like," she said, her voice shaky. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to scream, to demand answers. But instead, I stood there, staring at her, unable to fully process what I had just witnessed. "It's nothing," she said again, her voice almost pleading. "Really, you have to believe me." But deep down, I knew it wasn't nothing. Something had changed. The woman I thought I knew, the one who had been my partner for 20 years, was standing in front of me, and she was lying. Over the next few days, everything in my life seemed to change. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen that night. Sophie's kiss with Mark replayed in my mind over and over again, and no matter how much she tried to convince me that it was nothing, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust her like I always had, but my gut was screaming at me. It wasn't just the kiss. It was the way Sophie had acted around me lately. There was an air of distance between us, one that had slowly but surely begged end to take root, and now I felt it more than ever. It started with the little things. Sophie, who used to spend hours talking to me about her day, suddenly became more evasive, more withdrawn. She started spending longer hours at the university, working on projects that never seemed to end. I understood that her work was important to her, but this felt different. The projects were always described in vague terms, never specific, never giving me any real insight into what was occupying her time. She'd leave in the morning with a hurried kiss on the cheek, and I wouldn't hear from her until late at night, when she would claim to be buried in work. I tried not to think too much of it. After all, she was a professor, and it was possible that the start of the semester had thrown her into a whirlwind of assignments, deadlines, and student meetings. But the more I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, the more the feeling that something was off began to gnaw at me. One night, when Sophie returned home later than usual, I noticed that she was acting strangely. She had always been an open person, and if something was wrong, she would tell me. But this time, she was different, distant, almost guarded. I offered her a drink, hoping it would break the silence, but she declined, telling me she was tired and wanted to go straight to bed. That wasn't like her. Sophie loved winding down with a glass of wine after a long day, especially when it had been a stressful one. I asked her if everything was okay, but she just nodded, brushing off my concern. "I'm fine, James. Just a long day. Really tired." Her response was so automatic, so rehearsed, that it sent a chill through me. The woman who used to talk to me about everything, even the smallest details of her day, was now closing off. It was as if she had built an invisible wall between us, and I couldn't break through. A week later, I found myself in the kitchen one evening, trying to distract myself with dinner as Sophie was getting ready to go out. She had mentioned earlier that she was meeting a colleague for a dinner to discuss some academic collaboration, but the whole situation felt off. The way she was acting, the way she was getting dressed, it wasn't the Sophie I knew. Sophie had always been a little fashion conscious, but this was different. She had spent far more time than usual picking out an outfit for this dinner, carefully choosing a dress that seemed a bit too fancy for a casual work dinner. When she stepped out of the bedroom, I couldn't help but notice how different she looked. She was wearing a dress that I hadn't seen before, one that hugged her body in all the right places, with heels that were too high for an ordinary night out. Her makeup was flawless, and her perfume lingered in the air. It wasn't the scent she usually wore, it was something more seductive, more expensive. "You look stunning," I said, trying to keep the tone of my voice neutral, but I could feel my chest tightening as the words left my lips. "Thanks," she said, her voice flat. She didn't meet my gaze. Instead, she grabbed her purse and rushed to the door. "I'll be home late. Don't wait up." I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Her behavior was so out of character that I had to ask myself what was really going on. As she walked out the door, I was left standing in the living room, unsure of what to make of the situation. I decided not to confront her. I told myself that maybe I was overthinking things, that this was just another of those phases that every couple goes through. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about a dress or her late-night meetings. There was something much deeper happening here, something I couldn't put my finger on. That night, Sophie didn't come home until after 2 a.m. When she walked through the door, she was disheveled, her hair slightly messy, her makeup faded, and her eyes were red as if she had been crying. She kicked off her shoes and walked into the kitchen, grabbing a glass of water without even acknowledging me. She seemed out of it, like she was trying to avoid looking at me, but I couldn't ignore the sudden pit that had formed in my stomach. "Where have you been?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the rising tension inside me. "I told you," she said, avoiding eye contact. "Dinner ran late. I'm really tired. Can we talk about this tomorrow?" Her response was rushed, too rehearsed. It didn't feel real. And the fact that she hadn't even attempted to explain herself, to make eye contact, made my heart sink. It was like she was trying to avoid the truth, and I was starting to feel like I was standing on the edge of something that would break everything we had built together. I didn't push her. I didn't yell or demand an explanation. I could feel the tension in the room, the distance growing wider between us with every passing second. Instead, I simply nodded and walked away, retreating to the living room to sit in the silence that hung heavy in the air. For the next few days, Sophie was more distant than ever. She worked long hours at the university, came home late, and spent most of her time in her study, completely ignoring me. She had stopped sharing anything about her day, and when I tried to engage her in conversation, she would offer a quick reply and then retreat into silence. The worst part was the way she looked at me, like she was seeing someone else, someone she no longer trusted or cared about. It was as if I had become a stranger to her, and I couldn't figure out why. She hadn't said anything that would explain this sudden change, but I knew something was wrong. I could feel it in the air between us, in the way she flinched whenever I reached for her hand or tried to make eye contact. It all came to a head one night when I decided to confront her. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. I couldn't keep denying the truth that was staring me in the face. I waited until after dinner, when she was getting ready to leave for another late meeting at the university. I could tell she was planning to brush me off again, but this time I wasn't going to let her. "Sophie," I said, my voice low but firm. "We need to talk." She froze, her hand resting on the doorframe. For a moment, she didn't move, and then she turned to face me, her expression blank. "James, not now," she said quietly, her eyes darting toward the door. "I really don't have the energy for this tonight." But I wasn't going to let her leave without addressing what was happening. "No, Sophie, we need to talk. What's going on? Why are you acting like this?" Her face softened for a moment, and I could see a flicker of something in her eyes, guilt, perhaps, or maybe fear. But whatever it was quickly replaced by a cold, defensive mask. "I'm just busy," she said, her voice clipped. "It's nothing." But I could tell it was more than that. I could feel it in my bones. "I saw the way you looked at me tonight," I said, my voice shaking with frustration. "I saw the way you kissed Mark at that dinner. Don't tell me it's nothing. I deserve the truth." Sophie's eyes widened in shock, and for a moment she looked like she was about to say something. But instead, she just shook her head and walked out the door, leaving me standing there, helpless and alone. The days following that confrontation were a blur of uncertainty and raw emotion. Sophie's departure that night left me shaken, but in some twisted way I knew deep down that something had to give. There was a growing rift between us that couldn't be ignored anymore. We couldn't keep pretending, couldn't keep living a lie. The tension in the house was unbearable, and I knew it was only a matter of time before I had to face the truth, whether I was ready or not. Sophie continued her routine of leaving early and coming home late, always busy with work, always avoiding me. I spent my days trying to stay distracted, diving deeper into work, but it was hard. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen, the kiss between Sophie and Mark, her disinterested responses, her cold demeanor. I couldn't escape the nagging voice in the back of my mind telling me that something was terribly wrong. But I wasn't one to rush into conclusions. I wasn't going to accuse her without proof, no matter how strong the suspicion was. So I waited, hoping for a sign, hoping she would come clean on her own. The longer I waited, though, the more I realized that Sophie wasn't going to come to me. I had to take matters into my own hands. The first thing I did was start tracking Sophie's movements. It wasn't something I was proud of, but I needed answers. I didn't know how to confront her about something I wasn't sure of. She had been so evasive, so defensive that I couldn't rely on her to tell me the truth. I knew I was walking a dangerous line, but the fear of being left in the dark was worse than anything else. One evening I decided to act. Sophie had told me she was working late on a new project at the university, so I knew she'd be gone for a while. I was determined to see where she was really spending her time. I had an old tracker app installed on my phone, something I had never used before, but it had been sitting dormant for years. That night, I activated it, deciding that I needed to know where Sophie was going and what she was doing when she said she was at work. I knew I was crossing a line. I felt guilty even as my fingers moved across the phone screen, but I had to know. The seconds that passed as I waited for the app to load felt like an eternity. Finally, a map appeared. It showed Sophie's car traveling along the route she always took to the university. It seemed innocent enough at first, but as I continued to watch the tracker, something happened. Sophie's car veered off the usual path. Instead of heading toward the university, it turned toward a different area of town, the upscale district where some of the nicest hotels and restaurants were located. My heart pounded as I watched the screen, my mind racing with 100 questions. Why wasn't she at the university? Where was she going? I couldn't help but feel a cold knot form in the pit of my stomach. I told myself that maybe I was overreacting, maybe it was just a quick detour. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I had seen enough to realize that I was being lied to. I couldn't sit here any longer waiting for the truth to fall into my lap. I had to confront it. I grabbed my jacket and headed out the door, my heart racing with anticipation and dread. The drive to the upscale district was agonizingly slow, as if the universe was testing my resolve. As I approached the area, I could see the bright lights of the hotels and restaurants that dotted the street. I parked a few blocks away, out of view, and started walking. The hotel that Sophie had driven toward was one I knew well. It was an elegant, luxurious place, the kind of place that only people who had money or were trying to hide something would frequent. I felt the weight of that realization settle on me like a heavy stone. I wasn't sure what I was going to find, but I knew I had to see it for myself. I crept into the hotel lobby, keeping my head down to avoid being seen. The place was busy with guests coming and going, their voices and laughter filling the air. I moved quietly through the space, trying to stay out of view until I reached the bar area. And there they were. Sophie was sitting at a table with a man, Mark. The same man I had seen her kissing weeks ago. The same man she had been so secretive about. They were laughing together, sitting too close, their bodies leaning toward one another in a way that was unmistakable. My stomach churned as I stood there, watching them through the crowd. Sophie looked completely at ease with him, her face alight with the kind of joy I hadn't seen in weeks. She was laughing at something he said, her hand resting lightly on the table near his. I couldn't breathe. My world seemed to come crashing down in that moment. It was all real. It wasn't just my paranoia. Sophie was having an affair. I wanted to rush over there to confront them right then and there, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed, frozen in place by the enormity of what I was witnessing. The woman I had been married to for 20 years, the woman I thought I knew inside and out, was sitting with another man in a hotel, laughing, touching, acting as though nothing was wrong. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, watching them, my heart pounding in my chest. Sophie was oblivious to my presence, lost in whatever conversation she was having with Mark. It was clear that they were comfortable with each other, too comfortable for my liking. There was no guilt in their interactions, no hesitation. It was as though they had been doing this for a long time and the world outside of their little bubble didn't exist. Eventually, I turned and walked away. I couldn't bring myself to stay and watch any longer. The images of Sophie and Mark, laughing and enjoying each other's company, burned into my mind. It was all I could think about as I walked back to my car, my legs heavy, my thoughts racing. By the time I got home, Sophie was already there. She had returned while I was still in the hotel, and now she was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. Her eyes flickered toward me as I walked in, but she didn't say anything. It was as if she didn't know what to say, or maybe she thought I wouldn't notice anything. But I knew. I knew everything. I stood there for a moment, my heart breaking as I looked at her. I had so many questions, so much anger, but I couldn't find the words. All I could think about was how she had betrayed me, how she had betrayed everything we had built together. My chest tightened as I tried to process it all. Finally, I spoke, my voice trembling with emotion. Sophie, we need to talk. She looked at me, her expression unreadable. What about? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I know what's been going on. I know about you and Mark. Her eyes widened in shock, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she sighed, rubbing her temples as if she had been expecting this moment. James, I'm sorry. I never wanted you to find out this way. I never wanted to hurt you. But it was too late for apologies. The damage had been done. The trust that had taken years to build was shattered and no apology could fix it. The room felt suffocating as Sophie sat there, her eyes filled with guilt and regret, trying to come to terms with the truth. I was standing on the precipice, my emotions teetering between heartbreak, anger, and betrayal, and I had no idea how to process the weight of it all. I could feel the anger rising within me, but I held it back, not wanting to make a scene, not wanting to give her the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. Sophie's face was a mixture of disbelief and sadness. She looked like a woman who had been caught, but even more so like someone who knew the walls were closing in around her and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She didn't speak right away, and in that silence, I could feel the years of trust between us crumbling, falling apart piece by piece. I don't even know where to begin, James, Sophie said quietly, her voice trembling. I never wanted you to find out like this. I never wanted to hurt you. The words sounded hollow, empty of sincerity. How could she possibly expect me to believe that? How could she think that apologizing now would make a difference after everything she had done? I had stood by her through thick and thin, had trusted her with every part of me, and this was how she repaid me. I took a few steps toward her, my hands trembling at my sides. The anger that had been building inside me for days, no, 4 weeks, finally erupted. Don't give me that. Don't tell me you never wanted me to find out. You've been hiding this for months, Sophie. You've been lying to me, to our family, and you think an apology is going to fix it? Do you think I'm stupid? Sophie recoiled slightly, her eyes welling up with tears. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked like she was about to apologize again, but I wasn't having it. Not anymore. Don't apologize. I don't want to hear it, I said, my voice rising, full of frustration. I want to know how long this has been going on, Sophie. How long have you been seeing him behind my back? How long have you been lying to me? Sophie's face crumbled, and for a brief moment, I saw something that resembled the woman I had once loved. But it was fleeting, like a ghost in the distance, and it was quickly replaced by the cold, calculated expression I was seeing now. She didn't speak at first, and the silence stretched between us, heavy and unbearable. The truth hung in the air like a thick fog, and I could feel myself suffocating under its weight. Finally, Sophie broke the silence. It started a few months ago, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't plan it. But Mark and we were just friends at first. He was going through some stuff at work and I was there to listen. But then, one thing led to another and I ended up falling for him. She wiped her eyes, trying to gather herself, but the tears wouldn't stop. I never meant for it to happen. I swear, I didn't want to hurt you. The words cut through me like a knife. You didn't want to hurt me? You've been sleeping with him, Sophie. You've been seeing him behind my back and you expect me to believe that it just happened. I couldn't contain the bitterness in my voice. How long, Sophie? How long have you been lying to me? Sophie let out a shaky breath, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of her confession was finally sinking in. It's been going on for about 3 months, she said, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry, James. I don't know why I did it. I never meant to betray you like this. 3 months. The words echoed in my mind like a hammer striking metal. For 3 months, Sophie had been seeing him sneaking around behind my back, and I had been none the wiser. I felt sick to my stomach, the betrayal hitting me harder than I could have imagined. It wasn't just the affair itself, it was the lies, the secrecy, the way she had hidden it all from me. And now she was telling me she was sorry. Sorry wasn't enough. Sorry wouldn't fix this. Sorry didn't change the fact that everything I thought I knew about my marriage was a lie. You think I'm going to just forgive you for this? I asked, my voice shaking with emotion. You think saying sorry will make everything okay? You've destroyed our marriage, Sophie. You've destroyed everything we've built. Sophie looked at me, her face pale, her eyes filled with regret. I never meant for it to go this far. I was confused, James. I felt like we were drifting apart. I don't know what happened, but I just found comfort in him. It wasn't supposed to be this way. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Comfort? You found comfort in him? What about me, Sophie? What about us? We've been together for 20 years. Do you remember that? Do you remember everything we've been through? And now you're telling me that you cheated on me because you felt drifting apart? Is that really what you think? That an affair was the solution? Sophie lowered her head, unable to meet my gaze. She had no answers. She had no defense. She had betrayed me and now all she had left were empty apologies that couldn't undo the damage she had caused. For a moment, the room fell silent. I could hear the sound of my own breathing, steady but heavy, as I tried to process everything Sophie had just said. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of the mess she had created. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had loved for so long, had been lying to me. She had been living a double life and I hadn't even known. I hadn't seen it coming and that hurt more than anything. Finally, I spoke again, my voice colder now. I can't do this anymore, Sophie. I can't live in a lie. I can't be married to someone who doesn't respect me enough to tell me the truth. You've made your choice, and I'm making mine. Sophie looked up at me, her face a mixture of shock and desperation. James, please, she said, her voice trembling. Don't do this. I love you. I've always loved you. This was a mistake. Please, don't leave me. I shook my head, the pain in my chest growing as I realized the depth of the betrayal. You don't get it, Sophie. It's not just about the affair. It's about the trust you broke. It's about how you made me feel like I was the fool, like I didn't matter. I can't live with that. I can't go back to pretending everything is okay when it's not. Sophie's face crumpled as she began to sob, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sympathy. I had been broken, shattered by the woman I had trusted most in the world. She had betrayed me, and no amount of tears or apologies could fix that. I'm filing for divorce, Sophie, I said, my voice firm, though it broke with emotion. This is over. Sophie's eyes widened and she shook her head. No, James, please. Don't do this. I'll change. I'll do whatever it takes. Please don't leave me. But it was too late. She had already left me in every way that mattered. And now it was time for me to leave her. Sophie's face crumpled as my words sank in. The tears started again, rolling down her cheeks as she reached out for me, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I wanted to feel something, anger, maybe, or even guilt, but all I felt was an overwhelming emptiness. I was numb to the emotions that had been flooding me just hours before. There was nothing left to say. I'm sorry, James. Please, she pleaded, her voice breaking. I know I've hurt you. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. Just don't leave me. Please don't go. But as she said it, I could see the desperation in her eyes. I could hear the panic in her voice. It wasn't about saving our marriage, it was about saving herself. It was about her fear of losing everything she had with me, everything we had built together. But it was too late. She had already destroyed that. I don't think you understand, Sophie, I said, my voice steady despite the pain. It's not just about this one mistake. It's about the lies, the secrets, the years of pretending. You don't get to hurt me like this and expect everything to be okay. I can't trust you anymore. I can't live like this. Not anymore. Her eyes widened, and for the first time I saw the truth in them. She wasn't sorry for what she had done to me, she was sorry for what it would mean for her life. I saw the panic and the fear of losing everything, but I didn't care anymore. She had made her choice, and now I was making mine. I'm done, Sophie, I said, turning away from her, my voice low. This is over. I left the room before she could say anything else. I could hear her sobs in the background, but they didn't reach me. The house felt suffocating, and I needed to get out. I grabbed my jacket and left without looking back. I didn't care where I went, I just needed air, space, time to think. The reality of the situation hadn't fully hit me yet. I was in shock, numb to the bone. All I could think about was the betrayal. The images of Sophie with Mark, the lies, the years of trust that had been shattered in the span of a few months. I didn't know how I was supposed to pick up the pieces. I walked aimlessly through the streets, not caring where I was going. I didn't want to go home, it no longer felt like home. I wanted to escape, to run away from everything that had happened. But where could I go? Where could I run to that would make all this hurt go away? I ended up at a bar, the kind of place I would have never gone to before. But tonight I didn't care. I needed something to numb the pain, something to take the edge off. I sat at the bar, ordering a drink that burned as it went down, and tried to lose myself in the noise of the place. People were laughing, talking, living their lives while mine was falling apart. It didn't seem fair, but I couldn't dwell on that right now. I had to focus on surviving the moment. Hours passed, and the alcohol did little to dull the ache in my chest. I didn't know how long I sat there, but eventually I left, stumbling out into the cold night air. I had nowhere to go. I couldn't face Sophie, couldn't go back to the house we had shared for so long. I ended up in the park, sitting on a bench, trying to process everything that had happened. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. How could she do this to me? After everything we had built together, after 20 years of marriage, she had betrayed me. And for what? For him? For some fleeting affair that meant nothing? I had trusted her with everything. My love, my heart, my future, and she had thrown it all away without a second thought. I spent hours in that park, my mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. But no matter how many times I went over it in my head, there was one thing that kept coming back to me. I couldn't stay in this marriage. I couldn't stay with someone who had broken my trust so completely. I had to let go. The next day, I went to a lawyer. I wasn't sure where to start, but I knew I needed someone to help me navigate the next steps. The lawyer was kind but direct, asking me questions I hadn't even thought to consider. We talked about the house, the finances, the kids, everything. And with every word that came out of his mouth, I felt the finality of my decision sinking in deeper. "Are you sure about this?" the lawyer asked, his tone gentle but firm. I nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, I'm sure." The process began quickly after that. The divorce papers were drawn up and everything started moving in a direction I couldn't stop. Sophie had no idea I had already started the process. When I told her, she was shocked. But she didn't fight me on it. Instead, she tried to manipulate me to make me feel guilty for making this decision. "I'm sorry, James," she said one night, her voice filled with desperation. "Please don't do this. We can work through this. I'll go to therapy. I'll do anything. Please don't leave me." But I didn't give in. I couldn't. I had tried for so long to ignore the signs, to pretend everything was okay. But I couldn't lie to myself anymore. She had made her choice. And now I was making mine. The divorce was finalized quickly. The evidence of Sophie's affair was overwhelming, and there was no contest. The house, the assets, everything we had built together, it was all divided up. But the most painful part was the children. They were old enough to understand what was happening, but no matter how much we tried to protect them from the pain, they could see it in our eyes. They could feel the tension, the cracks in our family. When it was all over, Sophie packed her things and moved out. She left the house that had once been a home for our family, and I was left to pick up the pieces. I started the long process of rebuilding my life, though it didn't feel like life anymore. It felt like survival. Every day was a struggle to find meaning in the chaos. But as the weeks went by, I began to focus on myself. I threw myself into my work, taking on more projects and pushing myself harder than ever before. I spent time with Emma and Luke, trying to rebuild my relationship with them and regain their trust. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to make things right with them. And then, something unexpected happened. I met Laura. She was a client of mine, someone I had been working with on a new project. At first, we were just colleagues, exchanging emails and phone calls about the details of the design. But over time, we started talking more, sharing stories about our lives and our experiences. She was kind, compassionate, and had a sense of humor that made me feel comfortable in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't instant, but I found myself looking forward to our conversations. There was a spark, a connection that felt real and genuine. For the first time since everything fell apart, I felt like I could breathe again. I wasn't ready to jump into anything, but Laura gave me hope. She reminded me that there was life after betrayal, that I could heal and move on. And so, I began to rebuild my life one step at a time. I focused on my career, my kids, and the possibility of something new. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined who I was. The pain of the betrayal had dulled, and with it came the freedom to move forward. After the divorce, I threw myself into my work. It was the only thing that seemed to make sense anymore, the only part of my life that didn't feel shattered. I took on new projects, ones that pushed me in ways I hadn't expected. There was a strange satisfaction in focusing solely on my career, on creating something tangible and meaningful. It became my refuge, my escape from the mess that my personal life had become. But as much as work kept me busy, it couldn't fill the empty spaces inside me. There were still nights when the silence of the house was deafening, when I would lie awake and think about everything I had lost. The weight of the betrayal still haunted me, even as time passed. I couldn't escape the memories of Sophie's lies, her cold detachment. The way she had looked at me, like I was a stranger, still stung. But life had to go on. I couldn't live in the past forever. I had to focus on the future, on rebuilding the relationship with my children. Emma and Luke had been through their own share of turmoil, trying to navigate their feelings in the midst of the divorce. I could see it in their eyes, the confusion, the pain. But I also saw something else, a need for stability, for reassurance that we would be okay. I made it a priority to spend more time with them, to show them that even though everything had changed, they were still my priority. It wasn't easy. They were still angry, still processing the hurt of the divorce, and there were times when they would lash out or withdraw. But I refused to give up. Couldn't. I had to rebuild what had been broken. One day, as I was dropping Luke off at school, he hesitated before getting out of the car. "Dad," he said quietly, "do you think everything's going to be okay?" I smiled at him, though my heart ached. "Yeah, kid. It's going to be okay. We'll figure it out one day at a time. He nodded, giving me a small smile before getting out of the car. I watched him walk into the school, his backpack bouncing with every step. I wasn't sure if I was convincing him or if I was trying to convince myself. But in that moment, I knew I had to keep pushing forward. For them. For me. And then there was Laura. It started innocently enough, emails about the new project, phone calls to discuss details. But somewhere along the way, the conversations shifted. We started talking about more than just work. We shared stories about our lives, our hopes, our fears. Laura was kind, thoughtful, and she listened in a way that felt genuine. She didn't know about my past with Sophie, but she could see the weight I carried. And slowly, but surely, she began to make me feel like I could breathe again. I didn't know what I was looking for. I wasn't ready to jump into another relationship. But Laura made me feel like it was possible to move forward, to trust again. She never rushed me, never pressured me. She simply offered friendship and maybe, in time, something more. One evening, after a long day at work, I found myself sitting across from Laura at a local cafe. It wasn't a date, not officially, but it felt like the beginning of something new. We talked about everything and nothing, about architecture, about our favorite movies, about life in general. The conversation flowed easily, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. I didn't know where this would lead, but I knew one thing: I was ready to try. Maybe not now, maybe not right away, but I was willing to let someone in again. Laura wasn't Sophie. She didn't carry the weight of betrayal. She was someone new, someone who could offer a fresh start. And in that moment, I realized that maybe I didn't have to live in the shadows of my past forever.